Welcome to this explainer. Okay, we're skipping the long, drawn-out intros today because we are jumping straight into the blueprint of a massive transportation empire. I want you to think back to a time, not even that long ago, really, before smartphones practically ran our lives. The traditional taxi business? It had basically been asleep at the wheel for decades. It was a classic monopoly. Zero incentive to innovate, zero pressure to treat customers better, and the whole shebang was shielded by these deeply entrenched, complicated local rules. So we're going to look at how a massive global brand was built from the ground up in that exact environment, completely upending a totally complacent industry and rewriting the rules of how we move around our cities.
What if one simple app could change transportation forever? It sounds kind of arrogant in retrospect, doesn't it? But I really want you to think about the massive shift we're about to unpack here. We are talking about rewiring a fundamental human behavior that honestly hadn't changed since the widespread adoption of the car itself. Before this innovation, you either drove yourself, you took rigid public transit, or you relied on a really clunky, outdated dispatch system. The idea that you could just tap a piece of glass in your pocket and a stranger in a private car would show up minutes later to take you exactly where you needed to go, that was literally science fiction. We're looking at a profound leap in modern human trust and behavioral economics.
Okay, let's dive right into this with Section 1, a simple idea. Picture this. The year is 2009. To really get the genius of this launch, we have to look at the tech landscape of that specific moment. We were basically in the middle of a perfect storm. The App Store was still a brand new, wild frontier. Smartphones were just starting to unlock their true potential, mainly because the GPS technology embedded in those phones was finally becoming fast, super accurate, and just everywhere. Now, this company didn't invent the car. They didn't invent the concept of hiring a driver either. Instead, they recognized this technological convergence and started with one beautifully simple goal: make getting a ride as easy as pressing a button. That was it. No calling a dispatcher, no trying to explain what street corner you're standing on, just a tap on a map.
Think about the sheer friction of the old way. We all remember it, right? Standing out on a street corner in the freezing rain, waving your arm off for a taxi, just hoping one happens to drive by. Hoping the little light on top is on so you know it's empty. And then that agonizing negotiation at the end of the ride. Fumbling for cash, waiting for change, waiting for a paper receipt to print. It was a miserable, high-friction user experience. But contrast that with the new way. Booking a driver in seconds from inside a nice, warm building. Watching their little car icon inch toward you on a digital map so you know the exact second to walk outside. The payment? It just happens invisibly in the background. It wasn't just an upgrade. It was the complete, ruthless elimination of user friction.
Which brings us to our next phase. Section 2, rapid global expansion. So why did this concept catch on like wildfire? Well, the idea spread incredibly fast because of a powerful trifecta. It was tremendously convenient, it was affordable, and it was remarkably easy to use. But the real magic here is what economists call the network effect. The mechanics of the system meant that these three pillars actually reinforced each other. It's like a giant puzzle. The more convenient the app became, the more users signed up. More users meant way more drivers wanted to work on the platform. And more drivers on the road meant wait times plummeted, making it even more convenient. Plus, with all that density, prices could drop, making it way more affordable. This flywheel effect is the ultimate engine for viral adoption, turning a luxury black car concept into an everyday utility for the masses.
And because of that powerful flywheel, they absolutely didn't stay a local San Francisco novelty. They expanded into hundreds of cities all across the world, scaling at a completely unprecedented rate. This was the era of blitz scaling. They took a blueprint that worked in one city and aggressively stamped it across the globe, fundamentally changing urban mobility on every single continent. But here's the absolutely crucial thing to understand about this expansion. They didn't wait around for permission. They didn't spend years lobbying local governments before launching. They just parachuted into new markets, turned the app on, built a massive, fiercely loyal consumer base practically overnight, and let the sheer overwhelming public demand serve as their ultimate leverage.
Now, what's really interesting is the friction they hit next. Let's look at Section 3, battles and roadblocks.
Of course, when you disrupt the status quo at a global scale and actively bypass legacy systems, it's never going to be a smooth ride to the top. The pushback was intense. And these hurdles weren't just minor annoyances. We are talking existential threats. The company faced massive, well-funded legal battles from city municipalities. There were literal, sometimes violent protests in the streets from legacy taxi drivers. And you have to remember, for decades, taxi drivers had purchased medallions, essentially licenses to operate, often for hundreds of thousands of dollars. This new model threatened to render those investments worthless overnight.
Furthermore, they were running headfirst into strict government regulations built for a completely different era of transportation. The odds were heavily stacked against them, and the conflict was incredibly real. So how do they respond to these massive roadblocks? Well, instead of retreating or compromising their core model or, waiting for the slow legal system to catch up, they pushed through the adversity with a relentless two-step approach. First, they just kept relentlessly improving the technology. They made the routing algorithms better, the matching faster, the ETAs way more precise. Second, they kept aggressively expanding their services, moving beyond simple rides into carpooling and eventually global food delivery. The strategy was brilliant. Unyielding innovation and constant growth were their primary weapons against regulation. They basically operated on the premise that if you build a product that the public absolutely loves and relies on every single day, it forces the regulator's hands. You essentially out-innovate the law.
And that relentless, hard-charging strategy paid off immensely. Today, they stand as one of the most recognized transportation brands in the entire world. They successfully navigated those massive roadblocks and intense regulatory fires to achieve something very few companies ever do. They became a verb in our modern vocabulary. Just like we talk about Googling a question, asking someone to call this service has become the universal shorthand for getting from point A to point B. That represents a level of total market dominance and deep cultural saturation that most brands can honestly only dream of.
So, the crucial point we are building toward here. Let's get into Section 4, the ultimate lesson.
It all comes down to this core business mantra: solve a real problem better than everyone else, and the world will notice. If we step back and look at this entire journey, the most remarkable thing is how fundamentally basic the initial premise was compared to the colossal global empire it eventually became. They didn't invent the automobile. They didn't even invent the concept of the taxi service. They simply looked at a legacy industry that was full of terrible user friction, and they solved the problem of getting a ride better than anyone else had before by perfectly leveraging the technology we all suddenly had sitting in our pockets. So I leave you with this final thought to consider for your own work. What is the outdated, deeply accepted friction in your own industry today, and how could you be the one to press a button and just eliminate it?